The Finance and Budget Committee for Southern York County School District to order. 1.02, pledge to the flag. Please join me in pledging the flag. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
1.03, may I have roll call, please?
Elizabeth Dauberman.
Here.
Mary Lee Hall.
Here.
Samantha Hall. William Hall.
Here.
Jeremy Hash. Jennifer Henkel.
Here.
Nathan Henkel.
Here.
James Holland.
Here.
Joseph Plus.
Here. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to 2.01, public comment. Do we have anybody sign up for public comment?
Yes, sir.
Does that look like? So, 2.02, we will not discuss what we have not heard. Moving on to 3.01, the purpose of tonight's meeting. I guess we're going to hear about what's been going on with the budget process so far, set up the roadmap for this year, and get some significant updates from Sue and Trevor. I guess I'll hand it over to you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk until I can't, and then we'll turn it over. So we are going back and forth, so hopefully it'll go well. All right. So we're here this evening to talk about the 26-27 budget. I know it seems early, but as we walk through this evening, we'll talk about why that is. So purpose of this meeting is to see if the board, we are able to stay within the PDE index of 4.4%. And as we heard late Wednesday last week, that will be required for receipt of adequacy funding. So we'll talk a little bit about the state budget and the adequacy funding. We're also looking for the board to provide basic guidelines for budget development. And as we say every year, these are estimates. It's very early on. It is a conservative budget, but nonetheless a pretty solid budget at this point in time. So as we work through the process, we always look at where we've been. So we'll talk about the 24-25 school year and before. So we'll go through that pretty quickly because, as you know, we did a update in the October board meeting about that. Talk about where we are now, 25-26 for the current year. And then we'll talk about where we want to be and how we want to get there. So then we'll look at 26-27. So also talk about what's changed between 1, 2, and 3 and why that's important. Turn it over to Trevor.
All right, so as Sue mentioned, I will touch on the 24-25 results. I won't go through it in too much detail. She did present it in October. So just to start off, revenues were over budget last year, which is a good thing. When revenues are over budget, that's something we like to see. They were over by about $1.8 million or 2.8%. The other side of the puzzle would be our expenditures. Those were over budget, and there's a little asterisk we like to say. They were over budget, but not overspent. So they were over because of transfers that are not reoccurring. Those transfers for our capital projects. So transfer to capital reserve and capital projects. All that being said, it was over budget by $2.4 million. When you remove that, those transfers that aren't reoccurring, actual expenditures were under budget by right around a little bit less than $1 million, so 0.82% of our budget. However, when total expenditures are put in there, they exceeded revenues by about $3 million. And then again, this is just showing the same thing, but really the numbers are there. Just some things that are important to note when all is said and done. If you were to remove those non-reoccurring transfers, we would have a surplus of about $1 million, so $955,000. When you look at that compared to our expenditure budget, it's about 1.5% of the expenditure budget. So $1 million is a lot. No one's saying it isn't. But when you're looking at something around a $66, $67 million budget, we're within 1.5% for expenditures. So a lot of times we always talk about trying to get to that 2% range. So definitely within that, that we always try to peg. So again, these are just 24, 25 results. Really flew through this just because we have a lot to touch on with 25, 26, and Sue already presented on it in October. So really what we're going to do now is talk about where we are. So our 25, 26 projections and why that's important for the budget. We're really not able to explain what next year looks like without taking a better look at what this year looks like. So the exciting part that we can start on is that we do have a state budget. For the first 3+ months of our fiscal year, we did not have a budget. It made planning this budget very difficult because it's really hard to figure out what we're going to do next year when we don't know what this year looks like. So that passed November 12th, and just to highlight a few of those important items. Basic education funding increased by about $66,000 over last year, so 24-25, but it's actually below what we have budgeted. We budgeted an amount, so it's below budget by about $126,000. Special education funding is about $19,000 over what we had budgeted, or over last year, but it's below budget by almost $30,000. You can see that special education funding is highlighted in yellow. On Thursday, we received one amount. On Friday, we received a higher amount, and then this morning we found out the amount went back down. So some of these numbers are still changing. Again, it's early in our budget process, so we are updating the slides, and special ed funding was one that actually went up, down, and up and down again. So again, things are still changing. The next one is Ready to Learn block grants. That's also the adequacy funding that you'll hear us talk about. So last year was the first year we got a big increase in adequacy funding. It's about $520,000 in addition to what we received in the past. We did not budget for a second year of an increase in adequacy funding. So this is a big highlight in the state budget that we did get an additional about $520,000. The one exception and thing to note, you cannot go above the index should you accept that adequacy funding. One item we did include in the budget, but there was no revenue for when the state budget came out, was cyber charter funding. So last year we got about $135,000. We did not get anything this year. That is not a revenue item they added to the budget, with the exception that there is tuition reform. So that will be on the expenditure side, but again, you don't see it included there. Additionally, we will receive safety grant funding from PCCD. I believe this is the third year in a row we'll receive funding, and following our methodology, this would be used for the 26-27 budget. So while it is part of the 25-26 state budget, it's something that does help us predict part of the 26-27 budget. So again, just to really summarize, basic education funding did go up last year actual to this year's projection, but it went up by 0.69%. So really not a big increase there. And then special ed funding went 0.8% up. So again, these are less than 1%. They're very minimal increases with the state budget.
So one other thing we wanted to highlight quickly is the last two items there we think are very positive. So cyber charter funding, I think last year when we got the $135,000, we said don't hold your breath because it'll probably go away, which it did. But in exchange is the change in the formula, which I think is much more positive. It's much more difficult to rechange that formula than it is to take the funding away. So I think that's a very positive change in this year's budget, and we'll see what numbers it drives out once we get the new calculation. And then the last one we've been talking about for a couple years with the safety grant funding, they're allowing this to be used in subsequent fiscal years, which allows us to be able to plan. Prior to about 4 years ago, you would get the money in November and you'd have to spend it by June 30th, and of course you can't do good things if you have to rush that quickly to put things in place.
You answered my question, thank you.
So to take a look at the 25-26 revenue projections. Again, we'll talk through a little bit more of these throughout the rest of the presentation, but there's some things to highlight. So at this point in time, we're projecting that revenues will be less than budget by approximately $213,000 or negative 0.32%. So typically at this time of the year when we do our presentation, we can say, hey, normally revenues are over budget or we're anticipating more. That is not something we're able to say this year. The biggest item would be local revenue, which is down $309,000. That's primarily earned income taxes. Not going to talk too much about that. Sue will talk about that shortly. State revenue, it's up $82,000. So again, a pretty minimal increase. Part of that, and the biggest piece of the state funding that is up is that adequacy funding. Basic ed funding is less than budgeted. And again, there was no charter school revenue. So kind of reiterating, but state funding is up, just not a significant amount. And then federal revenue, that is just increased because of our title program. So Title 1, 2, and 4, that's up $14,000. But again, federal revenue really makes up less than 1% of our revenue budget. So we talked about that first half, which being revenues. The second half would be our expenditure projections. Expenditures are one of the highlights we can point to this year, at least for projection purposes. So at this point in time, they're about $1.3 million less than budget, which is about 2% with rounding. So some of these items would be unfilled positions since July 1st. These unfilled positions were conscious decisions that were made for positions to leave vacant. So at this point, we're about 3.5 positions down compared to where we were last year. So with that, and I guess a lot of that is enrollment based. So if we understand enrollment's decreasing, that would not be a position that we fill. So again, this was a concerted effort to not fill positions when they're not needed. When you have those unfilled positions, you not only have salary savings, but you have benefit savings. So in the next chart, you'll see some numbers tied to it, but a big reason why we have these savings are salaries and then the benefits tied to it. So PSERS, the retirement system, that's every salary dollar. So if you have salary dollars that aren't going out the door, you are not paying PSERS on that. And then in addition, if you have vacant positions or purposefully unfilled positions, we wouldn't be paying any medical benefit expenses. Our projections do include a $350,000 transfer or money that we are sending to the Lincoln Benefit Trust for medical insurance. This is as planned. We've talked about this last year. We'll talk about it more throughout the rest of the presentation. Some of the increases we have in our projections would be increased substitute teacher costs. Part of this is just we have some leaves, so we are filling those positions. And then we actually are able to get substitute teachers. So if you remember back during the pandemic, we weren't able to get as many subs. So we do now have positions that are being filled. Another highlight with this year's projections would be we have some stable and or reduced enrollment at York Tech. So the cost that we're spending and sending to York Tech has gone down. And then we have pretty level enrollment with charter schools and our special education funding. So what we are paying to educate students at places like the IU have not gone up significantly. We do anticipate some increased utility costs. We'll touch on that more when we talk about the budget for next year, but those costs are definitely increasing. So really taking what I just said in words, throwing some numbers to it. Salaries are down about $840,000 due to attrition, turnover, and then those unfilled positions that we've mentioned. Benefits, really just a function of those salaries. Substitute expenses are up about $70,000. Tuition that we were paying to other places, that's down $188,000, but that's just down budget to projection. Budget to budget's probably pretty level. Liability insurances, so that has been increasing over time. We've seen relief this year, so that is why that is down $92,000. Utilities we're expecting to go up more, so that's a $123,000 increase. We have taken that up, and that was something that increased in this budget. but it is something we continue to have to increase. We did not take it up enough. And then everything else is about an $80,000 decrease to get to that $1.3 million overall projection estimate for expenditures.
So before you move on, in the utilities line item, are you considering the savings from the Giza projects? Is that incorporated into those numbers?
Not at this point. So, and we can talk more through when we get to the electricity and just part of the reason why it's going up as much as it is. But we can make sure to highlight that. And should the Giza projects kind of project to yield a lot more, we can see how to factor that in. So really taking the revenues I mentioned, matching them up with the expenditures. We have a projected use of fund balance of about $1.5 million. It's worth noting that the use of fund balance in the 25-26 budget was $2.7 million, so we're actually using less than we anticipated, which is a very positive thing. It's also worth noting that in 25-26, at this point in time, our projected revenues of $65.5 million are actually less than our revenues were last year. So our last year revenues were a little bit higher than we are projecting they will be at this time. So that was just a quick understanding of our 25-26 projections, and now I'm going to turn it over to Sue for the 26-27 budget.
So before we go off this slide, I just want to emphasize again what this is showing for 25-26. Trevor talked about our operations, covering our operations in 24-25. We had $1 million higher revenue than we did expenses when you looked at operations and took out that one-time transfers. In this case, we're showing a deficit. We are not covering our operations with revenue, even though we had the multiple positions we did not fill. We took out one of the buses, a couple other things. So we've really been trying to mitigate this, but we still are showing use of fund balance here. Again, less than we predicted, less than we planned, but still use of fund balance. That'll have to be made up.
So if I can understand, in your projected expenses, is that taking into consideration the $1.3 million under budget? Is that already like baked into that number?
I
Yes.
think that's what we're looking at here.
Yep. This is the summary of what he was, the results.
This takes
he was
that
going
into
through.
account.
Yep. So now we're going to take a look at 26-27, kind of where do we need to go to? So it's early in the process, as we said, there's a lot of things we still don't know. We just received that 25-26 state funding, so to continue to bake that into things. So as we're going through things tonight, our goal is to determine whether we can stay within the index. So that's really the whole goal tonight, is to make sure we can stay within that index. I think it's very reasonable. It's conservative, but it's not overly conservative. I will say that. It is a very reasonable budget, and as we'll see on the next slide, there is a big hole that we need to fill. So we'll continue to take a look at things, but I did think it was important to start the 26-27 with kind of a summary of where we are. Our expenditures are up by about 3.8%, and our revenues are not. And so that is what causes the hole of about $5 million. If we were to use the formula we've been using for use of fund balance, which is 3% of expenditures and 1% of revenues, that's about $2.8 million, still leaving us a $2.2 million deficit. If we go to the index of 4.4% for a tax increase, yields about $1.5 million, leaving a remaining shortfall of $760,000. So this is a very challenging budget as we go through it. Also want to continue to reiterate that we can't continue to use that much fund balance to balance. We did that, and we put that formula in place when we were running surpluses, because we were getting a lot of extra federal money, we were getting a lot of extra state money, and we had a lot of interest earnings. As they decline, I think that reliance on that much fund balance is not prudent. So as we walk through things, I think we have to have a plan in place on how we're going to reduce that reliance. But this is for illustration purposes, so That's why we have it included here. Also does include $400,000 of contingency. Later in the budget process, usually around February or March, we reduce that to $300,000 because, of course, there's a lot of unknowns at this point in time. All right. So as we walk through things, we've kind of explained that really the big concern here is on the revenue side. And a lot of times when you look at budgets, you focus on the expenditures because that's really more what you can control. But I want to point out that revenues are just as important. It's an equal formula. So one side's just as important as the other, even though we don't have as much control over that revenue side. So we talked in the spring about areas of vulnerability. I believe all of those are coming true, and we are adding another one to that list. So we'll talk about real estate assessments this evening. We'll talk about interest earnings. We'll talk about state and federal funding, which continues to be a challenge. And then we'll also talk about earned income tax. So a good place to start with our discussion is kind of wrapping your head around what our revenue composition is. So if you look on the left of the screen, there's a pie chart, which the blue is the majority of it, about 64%. That's our local revenue. So that is the majority of the revenue we get to balance our budget. On the right, you'll see a pie chart which is representative of just local revenue, and you'll see that the majority of our local is real estate taxes. So as we start to talk about real estate tax assessment and we start to talk about what it's been doing, it's important to understand that that is the bulk of our revenue, and because it's not growing, that is what's causing some of our shortfalls. So we'll talk briefly about our three largest revenues in local revenues, that being real estate taxes, earned income tax, and interest earnings, and they were all on the vulnerability or concern list that we showed a minute ago. So this chart shows growth in real estate taxes, and as you see from the chart, the percentages are very low. I know it's small, too small probably to see on your handout, but the percentages are very low. And since 22-23, they've been about 1% or below. So that 1.26 is actually looking pretty good right now compared to the 0.74 and 0.27 and 0.07 we're seeing recently. So this is just a chart. That first line is 1%. Pretty much everything is below that. So it illustrates how low that growth is in our largest revenue source. So people often say, you look around our community and we're building things, but it does take a lot of building and a lot of assessment to actually make our assessment go up. A couple houses are not going to do it. It needs to be something way more significant than that. The other thing that's happening is we're continuing to get more and more exemptions and appeals. So exemptions are things like, oh, I have some, thank you. She's got my back. Exemptions are things like properties like churches and not-for-profits that go off the rolls. And then they would also be veterans exemptions. So we've had quite a few veterans exemptions, and we all agree that that's a good thing, but it does take it off the tax roll, and then we have to divide it by the remaining properties, obviously, to get the same amount of tax. Appeals, we're seeing more and more appeals. I think you're familiar with, there is a law firm in York County that is sending out appeal notices to most of the properties to try to get people to appeal. So we're seeing more and more of those. So the combination of those exemptions and appeals against our actual increases show the net change in assessment of a very small amount. So to kind of put it in perspective, in 24-25 we had a $6 million change in assessment. And $6 million is obviously a very large number, but it only yields about a net tax amount about $114,000. So that's why I'm saying you need a lot of property to actually generate a good amount of tax for the district. So our second largest local revenue is earned income tax. You can see from the chart, we had growth. It is now flatlined. The point for 24, 25, it actually went down slightly. The challenge with this revenue source is, first of all, we don't get the bulk of it until after May. The majority of it comes in June and July, or July and August, I apologize, and then we have to accrue it back to the prior year. And so we aren't going to know if this turns around, and it does look like it's very flat. I've talked to some other business officials. We're not the only district experiencing this. One of the reasons, again, this is hypothetical, that I believe this may be occurring is, as we know, our properties, when they go for sale, are such that often younger families aren't able to move in, which we've talked about that extensively for enrollment purposes. But on the other side, if it's older Pennsylvanians moving in and they're either retired or retiring soon, then they would come off the earned income tax rolls. So if you don't do this for a living, you may or may not know, we have personal income tax in Pennsylvania, and then we have earned income tax. So when you pay your state income tax, you pay on personal income tax. So that would be all of your earnings, and then capital gains and interest income and all those things. They all go together to be personal income, and that's what you pay from a state level. From a local level, which is what we would get, you only pay on your earned income tax. So it only is if you have a job. And so if people are retired, Pennsylvania, we don't get any of the amount from that. We don't get any of their interest earnings or anything like that. So the more retirees we have in our community, the potential it could impact our earned income tax. Again, it's a hypothetical as to why we believe this is flatlined. We'll continue to keep an eye on it. And then our third largest local revenue is interest earnings. We've talked about this one, and I like to bring this one up each budget for the last 20-some years because it fluctuates dramatically. We have been the recipient of a good bit of money for our community based upon us reserving money for capital projects. We've been able to invest that. We've been able to hit close to $1.8 million. But the concern is there's two pieces to this. The first piece is the amount you invest, and then the rate you get when you invest it. So as interest rates are going down and the Federal Reserve's lowering interest rates, that's one piece of the puzzle. The second piece is we use down fund balance. The amount we can invest goes down. So this chart will show you we had at June 30th, 2024, about $30 million. And as we go down to June 30th, 2026, that'll be about $16.5 million. So our ability to invest and how much we have to invest has dramatically declined, which means that our interest earnings are going to dramatically decline in that area. State and federal funding. We put this slide in last week before the budget was passed, and then we decided to just keep it there because we have no idea what 26, 27 is going to look like, as we never do. So right now, we have basic ed and special ed budgeted at a 2% increase. As Trevor told you, that we didn't hit 2% in those two areas at all, but we got adequacy funding. So instead of putting money all over the place, we just basically stuck with the motto of basic ed, special ed, 2%, hoping we'll get the adequacy funding again, but I don't know that we can count on it. So it's kind of where we are, and federal really doesn't impact us that much because we get so little of it in a normal year. So our overall revenue change, if you look at this chart, we originally had this titled overall revenue growth. There is no growth, so we decided to change that to change. If you're looking at the 26-27 budget year, overall revenue percentage increase doesn't even hit 1%. And so that is really where the challenge in this budget comes from as we're walking through it.
All right, so Sue just covered our revenue side of the budget, and I will take us through the expenditure side of the budget. So similar to like we did with revenues, we'll highlight a slide that we had last March, which was pointing out areas of vulnerability for expenses and expenditures. So one of those items is definitely ringing true with health insurance. We're definitely seeing increases here. We anticipated that last year, and you'll see shortly about how true it's coming. The next one is just our building renovations and maintenance. So there are limited projects that we are going to be able to do with the assigned fund balance that we have. Ways that we can do these projects would be by issuing bonds. And in order to issue bonds, we would need millage in place. We currently do not have that in place. So that would be definitely an area of vulnerability and something that we need to figure out when it comes to the budget, should we continue down this path for those needed projects. This is just a quick slide because we have a handful of slides more. Major cost drivers for the budget would be the contracted salary increases. So if you think about our budget, about 60 to 70% is really going to be salaries and benefits. So again, two of the biggest things would be salary and benefits. So salary increases, health insurance, retirement expense. Utilities are a big increase. And then at this point in time, as Sue mentioned earlier, we do have contingency at $400,000, which is $100,000 higher than we typically do. So in more detail, our proposed expenditures, we have an increase of salaries of $607,000. These are contracted. So we have a teacher's contract, support association contract. Those have been negotiated a couple years ago, so these are in place for a handful of years. And to highlight, we're now at current positions. So typically in the budget, at least at this point, we will include something like called an enrollment position. It's when we're anticipating enrollment increases. We do not have that in the budget at this time. We're down 3.5 positions from our budget, from the 25-26 budget that weren't filled. So that has rolled forward to 26-27. So we're already starting down from where we were last year. Benefits, that is up about $1 million, a little bit over. The biggest two items there would be medical insurance and then PSERS. So PSERS, that is the Public School Employee Retirement System. That is our pension system. That is not a rate that we set. It is set by the PSERS board. So kind of going through these things, as Sue mentioned, when looking at the revenues, we don't have as much control over revenues. And honestly, with these expenditures, some of the big items like PSERS, we don't have much control over. So that's a rate set by PSERS. At this point in time for 25-26, we are paying 34% on every salary dollar to PSERS. So it's a big dollar amount. And at this point, they're projecting that rate to go up to 34.72. That rate is not certified until mid-December, so we have some time to figure out and to hear if it will be greater than 34.72, hopefully not, or if it will be closer to 34%, which it has been the past few years. The impact of that is $413,000 is the impact of that increase from 34 to 34.72, and percentage-wise, that's about 4.2%. One item to note, we do receive half of our PSERS contribution back from the state as a revenue item. So the $413,000 is offset in a positive way with a revenue of $206,000. The second half for our benefit expense increase would be health insurance. So for those that have been on the board for a number of years, this chart should look familiar. I believe we have it in every finance and budget presentation. So just to summarize, we as a district are self-insured. We pay for our claims, our admin fees, and then we have a required reserve. If you look at the chart from 2013-14 through 2019-2020, the funding rate, so that dark blue line is the funding rate, that exceeded our planned costs, which is the light blue line. We had a fund balance over there that exceeded 700%. So it was a really high amount. And that fund balance there helped us do things like take funding holidays, freeze rates, because our goal was to get the two blue lines to match up. So again, the dark blue line is our funding rate. That's what we, the district and employees, pay for our health insurance. And then the light blue line is the cost of the plan. So that's the claims, the admin fees, that required reserve. So again, our goal with the self-funded plan is to make sure those two blue lines match up as close as they can as possible. Part of the problem, we're doing this after the fact. So we don't know what a year's like and what our funding is until we know what our funding is because we set it at this time during the year, but we don't know what the year we're currently in will look like, and we don't know what next year will look like either. So we're always kind of chasing ourselves, which is why there's wide gaps. But again, our goal is to get those two blue lines to match up as close as possible. So to put some numbers to that chart, for the last 3 years, we've had premium increases for the district and employees that have been 15% or more. And for 26 to 27, we're recommending another 15% increase. Again, that's for the district and employees. So 4 years in a row of 15% or more. In addition, we're recommending to send reserve money to the Lincoln Benefit Trust of $350,000 in 25-26 and possibly an additional $210,000 next year. Last year, we sent $490,000. And again, this was all to help kind of smooth our rates at the trust. To note though, so we are sending money there. As I mentioned on the other slide, we did have times when we had funding holidays, so that's where we brought money back. In total, we brought about $1.2 million back to the district through funding holidays. So really by sending $350,000 this year, potentially $210,000 next year, and last year $490,000, we're still not at the amount we brought back to the district. So it's just more or less sending the money back to where it was. The goal though is getting those two blue lines to match up, and the plan we have now will have the claims cost equaling the funding rate by the end of 2026. So hopefully those two blue lines are matching up, and next year we can say yes, our lines are matching, because we'll put the chart in next year too. So the actual budget impact to this is about $700,000 or 11.25%. You might think, why is that not 15% if that's what the increase was? And that's really just because it's the increase on actual insurance costs. So if we have attrition, if we have those unfilled positions, we're not paying insurance benefits. So it's never going to be exactly 15%. So this year it's 11.25%.
Just, if you can go back real
Yeah.
quick. The only other thing I wanted to point out here, we could probably spend the whole evening just talking about health insurance because it is, there's a lot to it. So we have the write-up that we do each year. We've updated that. We'll be sending that out to the board. So the 3 or 4 page document that kind of walks through this and goes into more detail about our claims costs. And then also the additional piece I wanted to point out is, you remember back to last year, this was planned, so we felt very confident we were going to have another 15% increase this year, and that was because we smoothed out last year, and that $350,000 was part of that second year of the plan.
Thank you, Sue. So one item to always frequently talk about would be our special education costs and programs. So we're a public school. We educate all students that come here. We either educate those students here in the district, or we partner with other school districts, with the Lincoln Intermediate Unit, or other providers that could provide those services to our students. The cost of those services do continue to increase. There are also times where, again, we educate the students that come to us, so we could have a family move in with a student that has those needs, and we would continue to serve that family. There's not a big dollar amount that we can put to it this year. It's just one of those costs that we continue to look at, and that continues to go up year over year. One of the providers that is worth mentioning is the York Learning Center. So we do have some students that attend classes at the York Learning Center, are educated through the York Learning Center, and the York Learning Center, through their joint authority, they are working to determine the next steps for the future of their building. So for those that have been around, that is Old Central High School. So it was Central High School when I was a student, and now it's the York Learning Center. So Dr. Bryson and Mr. Hash, I believe, have been working through scenarios with the York Learning Center as it's an impact to us here at Southern, and then many other school districts in the county. So it's definitely something to have kind of on the back burner for us with the budget. While this specifically isn't the biggest dollar impact, it is still something that we could see significant cost increases over time. And speaking of significant cost increases, we have our utility costs. So something that we continue to keep an eye on for both projections and budgets would be our utility costs. Really, to start with electric, there's really two pieces that make this up. So one is utilization, and then the other is the rate. So for electricity, our electricity utilization has not gone up significantly year over year. We're reasonable increases, but not a significant peak or anything. The big part that has changed would be the rate. So our wholesale utility rate, so something we do at the district, we do hedge for our electric and natural gas, along with diesel fuel, but that's not on here. So we do hedge those, and we hedge what we can. So we hedge our wholesale rate. That rate has increased 10% from 24-25 to 25-26, and then next year it's anticipated to increase an additional 6%. One piece we cannot hedge is what are called adders, and they are really exactly what it sounds like. So working with our energy consultants, the best way to explain what an adder is for our electricity would be a capacity charge. So the capacity charge is the cost for utility companies to keep energy available and on hand when we need it. So what does that really mean, and how does that impact the budget? So for electricity, we use megawatt hours as our rate amount, or what we do for the rate. So an adder in 24-25 was $38. And for 25-26, the adders are projected to be $51. So it's about a $22 increase. And then for 26-27, those adders are going up to about $76. So that amount is on top of the wholesale utility rate we pay. That is not something we can hedge. It's not something we can get out of. It's something that we will continue to work with our energy consultants to see if that's just an aggressive projection, or if there's reality there, and potentially it's just the demand for electricity costs are so great. The other item to talk about would be natural gas. So natural gas does have more usage related than rate related. The rate has gone up just normal amounts. They don't have the same adders, capacity charges that we're seeing on the electric side, but we are using more natural gas. You think about natural gas utilization, a cold winter can push that up. So the colder months, that can drive it up. We also have dehumidification at the high school. So really what that is just trading. So we have, before we didn't have dehumidification that was run through natural gas. It was done through using portable electric dehumidifiers. So that will save us on the electric side. So kind of a trade-off there. And then the labor time also is a saving. So we're not having people running around emptying portable dehumidifiers. So again, utility costs, that's not something we have tons of control over. We control what we can with our utilization and then hedging the rate. But with something like a capacity adder fee, there's very little we can do there.
Quick question on that.
Yeah.
So from the high school remodeling project, we didn't see any real change in utility utilization?
So it's really early at this time to see. A lot of this is based on our utilization last year. We had parts of the project that were still ongoing. So hopefully over time, we'll see decreases. Electricity has kind of stayed level, but the bigger thing, the cost side. So we do look at megawatt hours and I believe decatherms with natural gas. We're just still kind of working through to see what the high school project is yielding with savings.
Okay.
So if you remember, the whole project, so the new front didn't open until after the winter break last year. So we haven't even had a whole year to take a look at that yet. But it is something, we have these monstrously huge spreadsheets that look at, usage across.
Okay, was there any projected savings when we did that project? I mean, I'm just curious, 'cause-
I'd have to look back at the Act 34 booklet. I'm not sure that there was. I have to talk to Randy too about the difference in square footage. So I'm not sure when you look at square footage. The other piece with dehumidification is, as Trevor was talking about, so we have more of those things in place that we didn't have, and they're kind of offset differently. So try to explain that. So it's great that we have dehumidification costing more on the natural gas side, but we are foregoing a lot of expenses on the staff side because we're not emptying dehumidifiers.
and do we know, like, the boiler projects we're doing, will there be a change in usage based on that?
Well, they were projecting, what, 17,000?
Yeah, I was going to say 16, but somewhere in that ballpark, yep.
And I mean, that projection is obviously going to be, it's based upon our current costs. So if our current costs increase, then that number should follow suit and increase with it.
So, yeah, I mean, I think I asked during the presentation, they said it was based on volume, whatever the measure for gas is.
Therms. It's based on therms. Well, but we're also getting some savings on the electric side of it as well, and the rooftop units and their air conditioning capacity, than, in the boilers with the gas consumption. But it should follow suit as we're paying a higher price per therm, then that should also have you should see a higher price on the decrease in that $17,000 roughly is causing. So maybe that turns into $20,000. If you see an increase in cost, I mean, you were projecting 60, that was only electric, 60%, so you don't really have a projection for the natural gas, but I mean,
Okay.
it should follow one another.
Right.
Well, and I guess, what sort of percentage of our expenses is our utility bills? I mean, obviously, salaries are the 60, 65, 70% one.
Yeah, it's a pretty low percentage.
Okay.
Well, while we're on it though, I think I mentioned this once to you, Sue, but I don't remember if we followed up on it. There are some community members who have spoken to me, and their perception is that we run the lights brighter and longer at night than we need to. And of course, I don't know whether that's actually the case. There's safety concerns. Do you have any, has that been something we've looked at? Some energy savings possible also if it's bothering people, because bright lights.
I have followed up with Mr. Buffington on that. I think it's a balance between safety and savings. I will tell you, we get the opposite of, it's not safe to walk to my car, so it's a balancing act.
I remember a community member was mentioning it was like 10 o'clock at night and they were pretty sure nothing was going on at the school. I mean, because at a certain point, nobody's walking their cars, so, other than maybe security or something, but, okay.
Yeah, we'll continue to take a look at it. I'll bring it up with Mr. Buffington again, but
I think the other thing, ironically, as we were talking, the lights automatically went off in the hallway. So the new projects where we're updating the lighting, they are on motion detectors and automatically go on and off.
Well, and you would hope that with those improvements made in the high school project, I'm sure everything went LED, in the lighting side, that we would not see a flat line in our usage. We would see some decrease in our usage. Maybe we haven't detected it yet, but we would surely hope that would come from all of that work.
Yeah, so some things will save money, other things might cost more, like higher ceilings and certain, that can.
Certainly,
Yeah,
yeah.
so.
So to keep us moving forward, we have our charter school expenditures. I'm not gonna talk too much about this because it will change. So, 24, 25 I can talk about. That was our actual from last year. It was about 1.6 million. Our budget was very close and projection is still within that about $50,000 amount. The reason I don't wanna highlight it too much, we do have our 25, 26 calculated costs, but that was done before the new budget was passed. So those amounts will change. We anticipate that they will go down. We don't know what that amount down we don't know what they will look like. That true spreadsheet formula has not been released quite yet, so we don't want to jump the gun and think it's a better looking number than it really is. So I can say at the March Finance and Budget meeting, we will have a good idea of what that number will look like, because hopefully the state will give us that form soon. So again, we do anticipate some savings here, but just not exactly sure how much yet.
More quick question, the 25, 26, how many students would that be serving for the charter schools?
Yeah, we have about 80 to 82. It does vary month
Okay.
to month, but that's been one of the, I'll call it highlights with this. We haven't swung wildly, so I know during the pandemic and kind of coming out of it, we would have times where month to month that number would change 10 to 12 kids. So we're around the 80, 84, something like that number. Again, it could change each day. I'm not sure what's on the board agenda, so don't quote me on that
Right.
exact amount.
Yeah, so that's the 80 that we usually see in
At the very end.
okay, all right,
Yep.
thank you.
And then what this slide is doing, so again, we use some of the same charts year over year. We are the red line at the bottom. That is showing our charter school spend per student, so just per student enrollment. We used to have the IU and the state, but we really just wanted to highlight York County because they're our closest neighbors. So this chart is just showing, again, charter school spending per student enrollment. We have actually gone down, so we're 467. And this is for the 23-24 year because all that data is not available yet. So really just highlighting, while this is a big item in the budget at 1.6, 1.8 million, depending on the year, it is something that compared to our neighbors, we are doing all right with when you look at it on a per student spend. Just kind of moving through the end of the expenditure side of things. So one thing we do look at every time when we're working through our budget would just be our enrollment and then our staffing levels. So if you start at the far right, we have our 25, 26 enrollment, right around 2,700 students. And then our FTE staff is at 377 and a half. So that's everybody in the district. So not just teachers, that includes custodial staff, administrators, things like that. Comparing that to last year, we are down a handful of positions and we're down about 15 to 20 kids. What we did then is looked at 2010, 2011. So that was a higher time with enrollment. So we had about 3176 in total enrollment for students and staff was higher. So as enrollment has gone down, staff have gone down too. It's worth noting it's not always going to be a matched one-for-one enrollment to staff. So every year we have different programs that are offered, and especially when you look back 10, 15 years, there are things that are different. So there were different programs, different classes. So we have more autistic support maybe now than we did back in 2010, 2011, and different services are offered. Also worth noting, part of the budget process every year is to, so we collaboratively work with our elementary and secondary teams along with special education to understand what our class sizes look like for next year, what our enrollment looks like, and then what programs we will need to offer. So it's not just going into the budget saying, this is what we had, this is what we're going to do. It's definitely a concerted effort each year to talk through that. Really just showing you now, kind of putting some numbers to the words. This is our 26-27 budget. So coming in around $71 million, comparing that to last year, or this year really. So the 25-26 budget of about $68.5 million. We have that really moderate increase of 3.82%. If you look at the increases, there is a big 29.8%. All that is just the additional $100,000 for contingency that we include at this point in time during the budget process. So I'll turn it back over to Sue.
Okay, so as we walk through the rest of the presentation, we're going to start with our summary again. You've seen this before. This is what we started the 26-27 budget presentation with. And that shows our remaining shortfall after use of fund balance and a tax increase to the index of about $760,000. Kind of want to first walk through use of fund balance. So again, we've seen this slide before. We went from about 30 million down to June 30th, 2026. We're estimating we'll be at about 16.5 million. We move into the next year. If we use that $2.8 million of fund balance, that will take us down to $13.7 million, which will leave us 5% of 3.5 million. So 5% is per board policy that fund balance would not go below that 5%, which would leave $10 million for projects. So we don't have a lot left for any capital projects that we would want to do moving forward, especially if we're balancing with about 2.8 million. So again, you've seen this chart before. This shows Southern in relation to the other districts in York County in the IU. We are down at the bottom at 19.91 mils. If we went to the max, it would put us at 20.78 mils and generate about $1.5 million. It would still put us significantly below Southeastern, which is the next lowest tax rate. And to put it in perspective, if we had Southeastern's tax rate, that would generate almost $4 million, and this would be an easier conversation. But obviously, the max we could go to would be the $1.5 million. So this is 100% for illustration purposes only for this evening. Because we needed to present a budget that would balance with a 4.4% tax increase, we needed to be able to show that we could do that. This point, that would be a reduction of 5%. This is just options. We're not saying this is what's happening. I want to say that over and over again so someone doesn't believe that's what's happening. But this is what it would take in order to balance at this point. Would be 5 professional staff member positions, 2 support staff positions, an additional bus. So we took 1 out this year. This would be taking out another bus, and a reduction of 5% in the building budgets would get us to $786,000, and that would generate a small surplus of $25,000, $26,000 at this point. So this is for illustration purposes, and as you can see, it's very heavy on the staff end, and that's because that's what most of our budget is. So really, if we're going to make cuts, that's really where it needs to come from, because that's the majority of our budget. I must be not feeling well today because I forgot to say, because I say every time we're a professional services organization, that is what our budget is. Because I always have people say to me, well, what if you cut this and what if you cut that? It really comes down to most of it's salaries and benefits. So if we're going to make any difference and any big change, it's going to be in the areas of salaries and benefits. Not that we can't hold everything else and you know, look at every line item, because we do. But really, if you're going to make a big change of $800,000, it's going to have to come mainly from salaries and benefits. So we do have quite a few areas that have a great potential change. So the state budget, we and they have not had a full chance to work through all the pieces in the budget that was passed late last week. So we think there'll be some implications that we've kind of talked about tonight there. The PSERS rate, I'm really crossing my fingers that it's going to come in better than we predicted. The last 3 years, it's been better than the estimate, so we're really hoping. We continue to look at special education information, so any placements, any changes in programming. So we'll have to update that. As Trevor said, we're keeping a close eye on electricity. Hopefully that will come down. And then our cyber charter school rates, we believe we will be able to experience some savings in that area. Turn it over to Trevor to take us home.
Yep, so, similar to like we've had in a lot of this presentation, we have certain slides that we just continue to present. So this is just the where our money is slide. These are the other funds we have. So really just to highlight, the big one would be the capital reserve money, and these are all balances as of June 30th of 2025. Big one there is capital reserve fund, and that's for projects, roof projects. Every year we have set aside money also for our turf replacement whenever that comes due. So that's really, again, what that $2 million is going to represent. Then just a few other items that we always talk through at this point of the year and in our budget presentation. So we have something called the property tax rebate program. Over the last several years, the amount that we have rebated has gone down. It's just due to the number of people that have been applying for the program. One item that we think could be generating this decrease is interest earnings and investment income. So that is included in our property tax program application. So if you're eligible for the program and you do get interest earnings, that could have pushed you above the limit, which is just what's driving that down. So really, we're not recommending any changes at this time to our program. The state did make changes a couple years ago, and really the big change for their program, they increased the income limit, and then they have indexed their amounts to inflation. So ours are just kind of stagnant at where they are. So again, we're not recommending any increases at this time, but it's just one of those items where it would be necessary to know in the process because it's part of the budget. Another item we have is our volunteer firefighter and EMS tax credit program. Well, one's going down, this one's going up. So there's a program budget for this of $50,000. We have seen this increase in the 3 years of the program. So coming up in next calendar year, will be the third year of the program. And again, or fourth year of the program. And again, we've seen increases here. So again, no recommended changes, just something we like to point out. Almost done. So we have our food service management company. So that is Chartwells. We are in year 2 of our potential 5 years of working with Chartwells until we need to do an RFP again. We definitely appreciate the partnership we have with our food service management company and all the hard work that they do. Why this is part of the budget presentation is because come next year, so in a few months, we'll be coming into the time where we need to start our renewal process. One of the important pieces of our renewal process is understanding the meal prices that we charge our students. So at this point, based on the equity in the food service fund, which is that $744,000 number, we probably would not recommend a meal price increase, but it is worth noting that this could result in a lower guarantee we receive from Chartwells. So they make their money in the food service program, but if we say we're not raising meal prices, it could result in a lower guarantee.
And real quick before we jump off
Yep.
of that one, so the food service fund, how has that changed over the last 3 years?
So in terms of pricing or the
Well, in
equity in
terms
the.
of, yeah, I mean, I guess,
So prior to the pandemic, so if we go back 6 or 8 years, something along those lines, we had negative equity in our food service fund. We had a negative fund balance. Through programs that started during COVID, where the federal government and state governments were throwing money really at making sure all students would be able to eat, we have seen increases in our food service fund. this year, in our first year. And so through working with Whitson's, that number grew from a negative to somewhere, I think, say 500,000, I can't remember off the top of my head. With our first year with Chartwells, it was very positive. I forget exactly what that revenue number was, but that number has been growing year over year over year. So we're definitely seeing some positive increases in our fund.
So if you remember back to meal prices, the actual price that a student that's full price that pays the entire amount is much less than the subsidized amount that we get. And so as they subsidize more programs like reduced meals and breakfast for all children, we're getting the subsidy for all children. So if you come in here in the morning, our number of kids that eat breakfast is just skyrocketed. It used to be very few. And so we get subsidized for all of those free meals. So that's what's really generating the equity in the food service program. And we can only use that money for food service, but we are able to now, the general fund would have to pay for repairs to equipment and all those things before. Now we can use that for repairs and those kinds of things.
And then we are pretty much at the end of our presentation with just our action items. So walking away from this presentation, we want to make sure we have a few things in mind. The first would be that in December, at the December board meeting, we will bring a resolution to stay within the PDE index of 4.4%. And in addition, we will ask for approval of our medical rate that we pay, so the increase that we pay to Lincoln Benefit Trust, along with that $350,000 transfer I mentioned before. Those are needed at this time because we have to give Lincoln Benefit Trust that rate so they can factor it in January when rates are approved. And then at the January board meeting is when we would be recommending that meal price decision so we can start the renewal process with Chartwells. And that is it. Yes.
One question, please. Any idea on funding coming from the state or federally regarding building projects and updates maintaining our buildings for schools?
So I know through part of this state budget that was just approved, there was word that they would have a facility improvement grant. Federally, I don't know. I know there are always grants that we will always continue to look for. And I know that SiteLogic during their presentation, they have teams of people that look at that stuff too. So we will always keep our eye out for it.
So money that could help in the future.
Yeah, and as you know, we did apply for the federal safety grants. We did find out earlier this week we didn't get those, so we'll have to go back to the drawing board on that.
Nice try, though.
Yeah.
Thank you.
A lot of people trying to apply for those.
Yeah.
And I think the bill that was making its way through was a requirement to do a survey or inventory of facilities across the state. So I don't know that there was any money behind it. It was more, can we get the ball rolling with understanding what condition the facilities are like across the entire state? So I feel like we probably shouldn't plan on that anytime soon, because that'll be a process. That also requires a lot of money at the state level.
Quick question on the slide 39, the overall expenditures for 26, 27. I think I have the answer to this, but I just want to make sure to clarify. Despite having had a small reduction in staff over that interval, the salaries and benefits are increasing. There's a contractual increase in salary for the staff members that are still here, and then the benefits, I assume a lot of that's driven by the health insurance increase. Are there any other drivers? Is that pretty much it? That the increase in salaries is more than offsetting the reduction that comes from attrition?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Sure. So I know you said the other objects, that one's increasing a lot because of just an increasing contingency. But even though it's not a huge budget item, supplies and property up 7%, and then purchase services up almost 5%. I mean, what are the drivers there? Because purchase services, I mean, I know we said salaries and benefits is the big driver. Purchase services, the second, is after that the big driver. I mean, it's big enough to matter at like 18%.
Yeah.
So what are the drivers of those increases?
So I'll pick the easy one first, which was supplies and property.
Sure.
The big increase there would be utility costs. So
Okay.
utility costs are part of that.
Those go into supplies.
That line item.
Okay.
And then purchase services, that's a combination of purchase property services, people, property, and then other. So through that would be something like our busing would be one of those items. We have about a 5% increase in that price every year. Tuition would be part of that too. And then substitute teacher costs would be a third item. And then we just have the increases to take care of our buildings. So
Okay. So even with the reduction of one bus, or are you're saying a typical year would be 5%, with the reduction of one bus, did we kind of flatten that out?
It's flat, but it's still
Yeah.
it didn't offset it enough.
Didn't
to
come
get-
down,
yeah,
because
yeah.
there's gonna be a 5% increase, and then that we
The rest
maybe
of
saw a
the-
5% decrease, and they washed out.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, I mean, the big thing there in that one is going to be all of your tuitions and placements and charter schools, and all of those pieces are going to be in that
Right.
purchase service.
Any other discussion items?
I think you guys are welcome to come in
Yep.
on this, if you have any questions.
Do you guys have any?
Just want to make sure you
Yeah, I was,
had the invitation.
we're allowed to ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just curious, I have a bunch, so I'll just do a couple here, but on slide 49, you mentioned an RFP process, but you also mentioned a renewal for the food service company. So is this a skinny RFP, is it a blown RFP? Tell me a little bit about what that process looks like.
yeah, so and I know Bill and Jeremy were part of our committee last time, so PDE, I believe it's PDE and not the federal government, but they dictate that we're allowed to do an RFP, I guess as often as we want, but when we do it, can do it for 5 years. So this is just a renewal. So we have, last year was the first of those 5 years, and we can renew for 4 additional years. So not even an RFP, it would just be a contract renewal with our food service management, unless we feel we need to do an RFP.
Yeah, so it's an up to 5-year contract, and it is a very extensive, and it is federally driven, it's through the state, but it's federally driven process. But then you can go up to 5 years, but each year you have to do a separate agreement with them.
And then you had mentioned meal prices. Do you have a rough estimate on how many meals are fully subsidized versus how many meals students are actually paying fees?
I do not have a good enough estimate to give it to you off the top of my head.
Okay, that's fair.
And by that, do you mean like our free and reduced percent versus our paid percent?
Yeah, I was curious about that. And the other thing I was curious about is you said that these funds can only be used for food service. But I was wondering if there were 2 buckets. So is there a bucket of subsidized and is there a bucket of collected? So if there's collected funds, are those then able to travel outside of the food service world, or does it all have to stay in the same?
No. So everything in the food service program is contained within that program. So we can pay for things like food service related equipment or offset meal price increases or repairs like Sue mentioned or fees like that.
So, and just so to kind of clarify a little bit, you have free, reduced, and paid but they're all subsidized in some way. So even a paid meal gets a small subsidy from the federal government. So it all has to stay, all that money has to stay within there.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess that covers kind of 301, 02, 04, 05. Do we want to touch on anything there? Like, do we want to touch on anything as far as next steps and direction? I mean,
That was one of our last slides, unless
Okay.
there's questions on
Okay.
that.
all right. Okay. Any, 3.06, any other items of business? I have none. No? Okay, 5.01, I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
All right, we are adjourned, motion passes.
We're all like, yes.
Not that I want to go back to COVID.